All right. So I'm Nicolette Emmino, and I have Bryan DeLuca with me, and we're from Insomnicat Media. And I was thinking a little bit about writing, and not just writing anything, but writing articles that require some research. So actually, Bryan, what inspired this was I was in one of my Facebook groups that I'm in with a bunch of writers, and someone was about to do a conference where they were going to teach all these writers some writing tips. So they were asking us, what are your favorite writing tips? And I started thinking about,
so basically they were asking you to do their work for them.
To do their work, yeah. Which I did because I feel really, really passionate about this process that I have. So yeah. I'm sure it's not unique, but it really works for me. So, so I was thinking about this 3-step or 3-day process, I should say, because it's really, I call it a 3-day process. Steps make it kind of sound shorter, like I can do this really quick. So it's this 3-day process I have. And basically on the first day, let's say I have a topic, and it's important because it's something I don't know much about. It's not something I can just write off the top of my head. So I have to go in and I have to do the research. And it's not an interview because I do have a different process for interviewing people and then crafting an article around that.
Right.
But it's really about, an article that I don't know much about. So what I'll do is I'll go and I'll scour the internet and I'll grab everything that I can about this topic, and I'll just dump it in a Word doc, like literally the links, the quotes,
so pretty much all your research, whatever your research is, you're dumping into the Word doc, okay?
And I'll leave it there. Even stuff that seems, ridiculous that I won't need, or if I, have the same information 30 times in there, I just dump everything that I find, and anything I think of, definitions, whatever it might be, into this Word doc. And then I feel really overwhelmed. So I leave and I walk away, and I don't touch it again until the next day.
Right.
So
okay.
I go to sleep. I wake up the next day. I come back, and then I try to make sense out of everything that's on the page. So I'll start trying to, remove things that now are duplicates, and then I'll start trying to make sentences out of things and taking the research and, trying to create paragraphs and, my own words and think about what's there and what I can add to it. And then after doing that, I have a really, really crappy draft. I mean, it's terrible. It's like, it's not even resembling an article yet, but all the facts are there, and it kind of looks like something you might be able to read. And then I walk away again. And I go to sleep, and I come back the next day. And it's funny because when I come back the next day, it doesn't seem so bad. Like what seemed really terrible the day before, I can really finesse into a good article. Like I'll start, adding the correct, the correct sentence structure and an intro and a conclusion. I can remove all the nonsense that was in there. And you know what? I have a pretty good article after that, and it takes 3 days of walking away and coming back and editing and refining, but it's pretty damn good for something that I knew nothing about.
Right. And well, I think, what people, I think it's amazing how the subconscious mind actually processes things, right? And, if you think about this, you've absorbed all this data, right? It's being processed, whether you're asleep or you're driving or you're in the shower. Everyone has those, oh man, I came up with a solution while I was, taking a shower, or I woke up from that sort of flow state of sleep and, oh man, I just thought of the solution for the problem. And it's amazing how the subconscious mind actually processes information. So what you're doing is you're taking that time, and you're walking away, and your mind is processing the information and weeding through it. It's interesting too, because I sort of have a 3-step process when I create content too, but it's similar and it's different at the same place. How I sort of think of it is, if you're creating a piece of content, it's no different than if I was going to create, say a human being, right? or that context, where at first I'd get all the parts together, and it's the same thing. You're getting all your research together. So you have, for instance, all the parts of a person. And then what you're really doing, in that next phase, you got all your parts and you've assembled. Now you got to process, well, how do I put this together? What is this person going to look like, right? And the next thing you got to do is you got to create that structure, which is what you're doing on that second part, where you're almost creating like a skeleton of that person. And now you sort of got the form.
But it's important, like, it's not an outline. A lot of people will say, oh, it's an outline. It's not. It's more of a skeleton, It's,
right.
I think it's very different.
Exactly. So it's sort of the shape. And you can relate this to sculpture. Even when you watch people sculpt, they're starting with a big block of wood, and that's all their research, right? This is the type of wood I got to need, and these are the tools. And then I sort of sketch out what it's going to look like, right? I create that skeleton. Here's roughly how it's going to fit inside of this context. And then really that third part is, once you create that skeleton, you're sort of defining the details of what that person you're creating is looking like, or that sculpture you're creating is looking like. Like, it's going to have long hair, or it's going to have this color eyes, or, these are some of its features, or it's going to be very muscular, or, thin, or whatever the case is. And then what happens is, over the time of refining and processing that in your conscious and subconscious mind, what happens is eventually you're creating, in this case, that person or that sculpture, but you're creating that story, so it is a process that needs to be done basically in your conscious, where you're gathering the data because you know where you need to go, but then you're letting your subconscious over time, in this case, 3 days, process the information to develop, that article itself.
Yeah. I mean, I used to talk to someone who had such a hard time writing about things they didn't know quickly, and it always boggled me, because I'm like, I'm doing this in 3 days. I don't know what, I don't know anything about this either, and they think it's just a way that you approach it. I think some people really feel like they need to understand everything that they're writing, and I always, like, we're writers, we're not whatever it is, we're not scientists or engineers or whatever it is, the thing that we're writing about,
Well, it's amazing too, because it's one of the things I've been saying for years is sort of, and it sounds a little bit crazy, but nothing new is ever created, right? So, and the creative process is very interesting. So, and you could say, okay, and I'm just going to use a mermaid as the example. You could say it's okay. You have something new. Someone thought of this, or thought they saw this, and they thought it was a half fish, half person. But the reality is, a mermaid is just two things. It's a human and a fish. And someone, whether in their conscious or subconscious mind, like they thought they saw it in the water, or they invented it, or they saw it in a dream, they took components and they put it together. What's
you're
really
telling me that mermaids aren't real, right?
Well,
is that what you're trying to say?
Totally real. So, do you see some of those documentaries on the Discovery Channel? There are real mermaids out there. But someone, made that conscious decision. And if you look at all these things that are even, whatever, if they're in, in mythology, or, things that people are creating, what they're doing is, a lot of times, they're building off pieces. They have their pieces, and then they're creating something out of that. And that's totally part of the creative process. So I don't want to say nothing ever new is created, because I don't believe that. I believe new things are created. But what happens is, a lot of times, creativity is not so much of creating something new. Everything's been invented. It's just you perceiving it in the correct way. So, it's how you've now perceived those things that exist, how you've taken your research and perceived them through your conscious and subconscious mind into actually establishing and creating an article. So those things, in this context of your article, they already existed. You put them together, you put them in a big pile, right? And you said, here's all the components. Your mind went away, and you went into your subconscious, and now it came back, and it was reassembling those things in the correct order. And that is really the creative process. The creative process actually takes various things, sometimes that and I'm going to say most of them don't exist. I'm not going to say nothing. Nothing new is ever invented, right? New things are invented all the time, but a lot of times they're invented off of pieces that come before them, right? And so that's what's really happening. It's no different if you were creating, say, maybe a piece of technology, and do you know what I mean? Like a phone, or something, like an iPhone or something like that, or, a new computer or something. You're advancing it, or even the people, you're taking pieces that sort of exist, and you're assembling them into something new. And that's pretty much what you're doing in the terms of your research. Like I said, I don't want anyone to sit here and write us really, nasty emails or put comments that things are new or created. Yes, things new or created. They are. But my point is, a lot of times in the creative process, you're taking things that already exist, you're reassembling them in your conscious and subconscious mind, and you're creating new things out of those. So.
Well, that also lends into how important sleep is. I mean, people think I'm crazy, but if I don't sleep in between doing these things, I can't see it clearly. I just can't. It's so hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's interesting is you talk about sleep, but and you know me, I barely sleep, right? But there's this point in me. So maybe that's where the craziness lies in. But there's this point in me that believes that sleep or meditation. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're meditating or you're sitting there, I mean, one of my favorite things to do in this world, is to sit there and float in the ocean, and over sudden things come to me while you're in that sort of state where you're in a trance. That's why people have those shower thoughts, right? They all of a sudden realize the answer while they're in the shower or while they're driving to work or whatever the case is, because you're in this meditative state and your mind is relaxed and loosened up a little bit, and it will sometimes see the answer. And sleep works the same way. It's really a very meditative state that you're looking at that you need to come up with the answer sometimes.
Yeah, I had the idea that we should talk about this when I was in the shower, shaving my legs. That's when I have all my good thoughts.
there you go. There you go. Awesome shower thoughts. That should be the topic of this podcast, right?
But, I mean, the other thing to think about is, and this is just for writing this type of, like, I don't, people to think it should always take 3 days to write something, or this is the process for everything. This is just what works for me and never fails me ever, and let's say, you got to sneak an interview in there. I mean, that process is a little different because there's research that comes before, and there's, I always like to put in a ton of different questions when I'm talking to someone, because I never know where, the conversation is going to go. And I'd never have an idea of what I really want an article to be about before I talk to someone, It's kind of, it's just a very different process but then it turns into the same process. After you do the initial, different steps pre-interview and during interviews, then it comes down to, okay, now I have all of this crap. What do I do with it? And, so I always walk away after I do an interview. I just leave, I'm like, I can't even look at this right now. That was just too much for me. And then I come back the next day and I read through it, or I listen to it, or whatever it is. And then I'm back at square one, and I try to craft some sort of crap. And then, why do I call my writing crap? I don't know.
I don't know. But you're a great writer, so I'm not sure why. But hey, it's all good.
But I think it's a beautiful thing, after a couple of days, and it's just a process,
Yeah, and but if you look at that, even and you could take people that paint watercolor, and I know you and I both have a good friend who's a pretty amazing watercolor artist. And it's interesting too, because if you watch them work, what they'll do is they'll sketch, right? And they'll sketch, and sometimes they'll sketch it out while they're live, and then they'll take photographs, and then they'll create the painting, or sometimes they're creating the painting live. And I think it's just sort of where you are in that process, where you are in that creative process. Like sometimes you do need to go away and absorb, right? And come back from a creative standpoint. And sometimes you're able to create on the spot. And I also think, to your point, there's various different types of content out there where some of it needs to be a lot more creative, where some of it is more, structured. Do you know what I mean? Where you can just, you could sit down and you could assemble it and you could put it together. And it may just be, you're doing quick research and then you're assembling these pieces, which is still sort of the same process, but you don't have to think through, like, you don't need that creative piece, like, okay, how do I process all this information, get it down into something, that users are really going to, find useful to whatever they're searching for. So, but I think just the reality is it comes down to, writing has that same creative process, and many of those traits of creativity and that process just have a tendency to, fall over into writing, even if it is writing an article and not so much, creative writing, like writing a novel or, short stories or things like that.
So I think the important thing to take away from this, from what I learned and what I've spoken to other people about, what they get hung up on, is really not to get stuck on needing to understand all of the material. Like if there's anything like anyone should really walk away with, like just let it go, take what you need, internalize it, do what you gotta do, and then write it,
Right.
You don't need to understand the definition for whatever, I mean, you need to know what it is to write it, yeah, but do you really need to understand how that thing works and the history behind it? No, and people kind of go off down these other paths while they're doing the research. Oh, what is that? Oh, do I need to know that? And then let's click this and click that and click that, and let's talk to this person because, and it's just so far from where they started.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Well, it is. I think with people like that, they don't have enough belief in themselves or their I don't want to say the creativity because that's probably not the right word here, but they don't have enough belief in themselves or their ability to pull those things out from the universe, or all the data they have. So they start relying on other things like, that other, oh, let me go get an interview from this person. You have to create the piece and then rely on that sort of as an after effect, right? Whether it's a copy editor or maybe you have a technical editor if you're writing something that's really technical, or an engineer in your company, where the writing process may happen and then the engineer is going and doing the validation. Do you know what I mean? To make sure, okay, yeah, this is correct. And what happens is I think the people that do get stuck just don't have, enough of a belief in themselves or the capabilities, and they should. Do you know what I mean? Because I believe every human being is a creative human being. They should have the belief in themselves. But I think what happens is they don't have enough belief in themselves as a writer or as a human being to go out there, and they feel like, oh, let me be dependent. And maybe sometimes it's not even the belief in themselves, it's their environment. But then, I would say to them, they probably should be in a better environment where they feel the freedom to be themselves and create, but that's, that's why we do what we do, right?
So. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about writing and the 3-step process, and it's never failed me.
I think you have a really great process, and I think there's a lot of people out there, both emerging writers and veteran writers that should really, think about trying it. Creating that outline, getting all get all that data together, and then create that first draft and that second draft, and use that process because, like I said, it's amazing how much the subconscious processes things for you while you're not, actually consciously thinking about them. So
yeah.
I think it's good. I think you should share it with everyone.
Yep, I will.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
That's it for today. I'm sure we'll have more interesting topics for all you guys. And thank you, everyone who's listening. Have a great day.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.